What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity, interviewing a multitude of builders and ecosystems across Web3. Today, we have the honor. This is the first for Darren and I. It's the first for Genfinity to have Hugo Philion, who is the co-founder of Flare Network, CEO of Flare Labs. Always like to start these out with a little bit of an intro. So, Hugo, if you could maybe just give us an intro of yourself, an overview of your role within Flare Network and Flare Labs, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so my name is Hugo Philion. I'm co-founder and CEO of Flare, essentially the Flare project. I sit on the board of the Flare Foundation, and I'm the CEO of Flare Labs. So there's a bunch of different entities there. But essentially, myself and the team started Flare. My role was really to help it raise money, to help define what we're doing, to do some technical aspects, to work with the CTO, the Chief Scientific Officer, to get it up and running. Now my role is fundamentally changing towards strategy around how to help the ecosystem grow, and communication of what Flare is, why it matters, why it's important. I think that's an important role of anyone that leads a project. So how did I get into crypto? I think that was one of your questions.
Yeah, 100%. It's always an interesting story.
Okay, so I was a trader at a hedge fund, a portfolio manager more formally, running commodity strategies at two large hedge funds in London. I got to a point during that sort of time where two things, I'd had a couple of very good years, and then also the market got very dull, and I started looking at people around me, thinking, I'm not really sure I want to be in this industry. Staring at a Bloomberg screen and looking at looking at spreadsheets and writing programs for trading all day. So left to study machine learning at UCL. And that's where I met my two co-founders. And one of those co-founders got me quite interested in crypto. I'd heard of Bitcoin before. I'd owned Bitcoin. Mostly it's just a speculative bet. But it was really at UCL that I got really much more interested in the space.
Go for it, Darren.
Can you give us just a broad overview of Flare?
So Flare's layer one, Ethereum virtual machine blockchain. So fundamentally, that means that you can build, it's like any blockchain that has a EVM. You can build smart contracts on that, which are programs that can essentially be executed on chain. The most key difference between Flare and other blockchains is that it has integrated data protocols. And what those means is that we can get two types of integrated data protocol. The first is something we call the Flare time series oracle. This is for, well, typically at the moment, crypto price data, but it could be for any other type of time series data. So that type of data is something that when I look at it, I see one price. When you look at it, you might see another price. So therefore, it's really hard to come to consensus over. So you need a slightly different algorithm. So that's the FTSO. And that's just been upgraded to support 1,000 prices, updated every block, or at least updatable every block. The key aspect about that and the other protocol, which is called the Flare Data Connector, which allows for data from other blockchains and from Web2 APIs to be attested and verified on Flare, is that all of the validators are taking part in both protocols, and the weight of their stake dictates essentially the answer that is given on Flare. And so this gives you a very high degree of decentralization around your data. And it also gives you a lot of economic safety, because the stake that those validators have put up obviously is heavily diminished in value if there is a malicious attack. And so therefore, the stake acts as an incentive to be a good participant in the network, to have good hardware that's operating on the network so that it's always there. So you get your reward that covers, it's essentially your yield for the stake. But it also acts as an economic security device, making the data that applications on Flare use safer, more robust, and ideally a better place for builders to build. That's essentially the core thesis behind Flare, which is merging an EVM layer one with high quality, robust, economically secure data.
Awesome. So I'm curious if you could, and Darren, we'll have to be cognizant that we don't get overlap in these ones, so we'll have to ask these in some unique ways moving towards the FTSO questions. But I'm curious, Hugo, if you could just walk us through, because I think Flare is also unique with the FAssets. Can you tell us just a little bit of an overview of the FAssets? When will FAssets release on Flare mainnet? Just kind of walk us through what those represent within the ecosystem.
Okay, so you can think of FAssets as a dApp that is built using Flare's two core protocols, the FTSO for price and the ability to prove something from another network for those proofs. And ultimately, it's the first verifiably economically secure bridge. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about a traditional, like let's just take a real simple multi-sig bridge, it might have 5 nodes or 10 nodes. And you need a majority of those nodes to basically attest a transaction across chain, and therefore to interact such that you can bridge value or information across chains. Those nodes, in the case that they're unstake, ultimately you're trusting those 10 nodes, and that's the traditional bridge design, and that's something like a wormhole. And then you might go a step further and you might say, well, those nodes should be staked. Let's create a blockchain around that. But ultimately, there's no way for that blockchain to continually make sure that it's holding more value than has been bridged. So if you think about the scenario where a blockchain that is attesting to smart contracts on different chains is holding less value or even the same amount of value as has been bridged, then there starts to be an economic incentive to screw around with the bridge. You might, for instance, get an economic incentive. Full safety attacks are very rare, but liveness attacks are feasible within these kind of bridge designs. So what the FAssets does is it says, let's break that model. Let's use collateral in order to bridge something like Bitcoin. Let's make sure that that collateral is always more than 1 against Bitcoin. So the collateral that we're using is a combination of stable coins, at least 1x in stable coins, and our own token, Flare, at least 1x in Flare. So it means that you always have 2x the collateral and in the bridge, so that ultimately there's no reason to screw around with the bridge. That's the basic aspect of what FAssets is. It's a little more complex than that. Quite a lot of relatively fancy economics involved, but that's the basics of FAssets. It's the first verifiably economically secure bridge, and we're going to be applying it to Bitcoin and to XRP to start with.
Darren, you go.
Oh, I thought it was your
Oh no, I'll go. So I think you mentioned collateralization, obviously, but and you mentioned Bitcoin and XRP. What other FAssets would you imagine in the near term might be interesting to bring into the Flare ecosystem outside of those two?
So FAssets are fundamentally a solution for non-smart contract tokens like Bitcoin and XRP. And the reason for that is that there's no way for FAssets to compete at the economic level with bridging solutions for smart contracts, for smart contract networks. No one would tie up that amount of collateral in order to do that. And there's already fabulous bridges, fabulously large bridges for those networks. So we're not applying the FAssets to things like Ethereum, USDC, USDT. It fundamentally, therefore, non-smart contract token assets. And I think Doge has always been a target of mine. Maybe Bitcoin Cash, maybe Litecoin, but we'll see. We're obviously interested in FAssets supporting the widest number of protocols, but it's more important for us to get the biggest ones and to get those systems truly up and running and highly liquid and large.
Can you talk about the importance of layer cake and the timeline of release for mainnet?
So layer cake is a protocol for smart contract bridge. that has been put forward by Flare. And we'll be releasing our full bridging strategy for smart contract networks in a couple of weeks. The key aspect of what we want to do is to be able to get the FAssets onto other chains and to be able to get stable coins and assets like Ether and other L1 tokens onto Flare. So I won't say when we're releasing that, right now, but there'll be an update on Flare's smart contract bridging strategy quite soon.
Yeah, roadmaps are always tricky to get into in this space, as we all know. I want to kind of take a step back real quick too. When we think about FAssets and non-smart contract based assets in this space, we kind of get into the weeds with individuals or communities that are engaging with non-smart contract based assets. Obviously, is there a learning gap that you guys have to get over to have these individuals to participate in things like DeFi or whatever you would want to do, which Flare obviously is doing really well, and that's kind of one of the points. It opens up opportunities for people that may be in the XRP community or maybe in the Bitcoin community that don't have kind of the ability to do some of these things that everybody else in crypto is doing.
So I think the success of any project relies on understanding your target user, understanding their capabilities and making allowances for that. And making sure that you're building the necessary tools to get people who maybe haven't participated in Ethereum or L2 based DeFi, able to use the protocols, having the right kinds of guides, having the right kinds of information. It's hard to do when you have communities that are less established in using protocols on chain. But I think so far, with the various partnerships we have, one of which, shout out to Bifrost Wallet, who's been unbelievably fantastic at essentially integrating some of the core protocols like staking, delegation, and I'm very hopeful we'll be very forward thinking in terms of things like FAssets. And then, of course, we developed something called the Flare Portal, which allows you to do stuff. And then MetaMask, because we're an EVM chain, does make building front ends and for users to deploy things on those front ends much easier than to have one solution that pretty much everyone knows how to use or can easily learn how to use is very useful. I think when it comes to Bitcoin and Bitcoin, I think we'll be heavily successful there because that community is very well versed in. On the whole, they're fairly crypto OG, and so they will probably have tried out things like Ethereum. They will probably have. They'll probably be traders on most chains, or at least have used protocols on many chains. With regards to the XRP community, I think we've seen very good development there. Obviously, we have a very large community around Flare, many of whom have come from the XRP community, and they've been actually really fantastic around using the protocols. But I think the next sort of season for Flare, the DeFi season, will be a step up.
Can you talk about the differences between oracles and other ecosystems versus Flare, like Chainlink or something to that degree? What's the key differences with the oracles?
I mean, we have internal presentations on this that probably run to like 25 pages, but I give you the very high level. Fundamentally, it's economic security, right? Flare is staked. So there's a combination of factors. The first is stake, and other chains will claim that they have stake, but they sort of don't. They do, but they don't. It's like highly managed process. But then also, it's also a question of participation. So if you look at like Chainlink regular data feeds on Ethereum, you may have a number of nodes that participate in a popular data feed. You get below like the top 10 and your number of nodes drops off very dramatically. So you may have 2 nodes participating in a particular type of data feed. Obviously, they're trying to change that, but the traditional model has been somewhat different. With Flare, you have all of our validators participating in all of the data feeds, essentially weighted by all of the stake on the network. And so this means you get an oracle that has maximal economic security. And Flare has an extremely high staking rate, both for the delegation to the oracle specifically, but also to the staking to the validator. And remember, the validator and oracle will very soon be one and the same. So you cannot run a validator without being an oracle, and vice versa. So ultimately, for us, it's about amassing the largest amount of economic security, amassing the largest amount of participation to get the greatest amount of decentralization, so that no one set of people or no one person or one cabal can control the data that is being used by applications on chain. And I think fundamentally, we go a lot further than any other protocol in making that happen.
Yeah, I think you touched on this a little bit, but we have it in here, so I'm maybe going to ask it in a different way. But if you look at all the bridges out there in crypto land, can you maybe just reiterate or emphasize the importance of how you guys have set up bridging assets into the Flare ecosystem in a way that is like fundamentally different from what else exists out there? Maybe in as layman's termy as we can maybe get here.
So I think again, it's about economic security, and ultimately, I'm focused on these non-smart contract assets with the FAssets. I think I'll try to kind of break it down a bit further, which is, and I'm putting aside ZK type bridges at the moment. And I'll tell you for a very simple reason why I would put those aside is because there's no way to prove what fork you're on with a ZK network. So if you let's say Bitcoin forks. How could you prove that you're making a proof from the most supported fork? And so I think that's a fundamental issue that ZK has at the moment that is unresolved. And that's why we've chosen as a network to remain with attestations as opposed to move to ZK, because those attestations are driven by stake, right? They are driven by how much money is sitting behind Flare and how much value is at risk of choosing of either giving bad data or giving the wrong fork. So give you a really hypothetical example: Bitcoin forks into two networks. One's you maybe have like another Bitcoin Cash or whatever it is, and there's some contention over the time over which is the official Bitcoin. Obviously, there's a fork selection rule of the longest chain, but there's going to be some period of time where you could potentially prove from both chains, and that's ultimately, it gets into kind of a form of social consensus as to which is the official fork at the end. Once you go right the way down the stack, and ultimately, you can't solve that with something like ZK. You can only solve that with putting people's money at stake. And that's why we use collateral. That's why we use stake in order to get the data. And so it's a little bit of a different way. And what we're trying to achieve with the FAssets is essentially the most trust minimized bridge, where that the funds on the bridge are protected by more collateral than has been bridged.
So when the XRP ledger was voting for burn to mint and they turned it down, does that affect Flare's bridging capability in any way? Would burn to mint make it easier to bridge?
No, burn to mint was just a mechanism by which I think it was something to do with Zahao. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Sorry, but it's basically you could burn your XRP, and Zahao would give you a token on the other side. But that's not at all the FAsset bridging model. It's completely different. We can feasibly apply FAssets to any chain with any protocol. It really doesn't matter. We won't. We'll probably only apply them to chains that are really worth doing.
Yeah, I'm curious. Obviously, coming out of a good amount of the community being the XRP community as kind of Flare launched and everything else. What are your views on XRP, utility of XRP, things like that, the ecosystem as a whole, just maybe in broad strokes?
So I've always, I've been fairly strident with my views, and trying to turn over a new leaf and not make cast aspersions on other ecosystems, XRP included. But at the same time, I think, look, we're building towards being able to use XRP with DeFi, with lend your XRP, take perps positions in your XRP. buy assets with your XRP that you can't buy on main chain. Put your XRP in a DEX so you get liquidity, liquidity incentives, things like that. So full fundamental DeFi ecosystem. I think with XRP, the fundamental use case of XRP, which is this bridge asset between two real world currencies, like I think it's materialized somewhat, but not enough for it to be like a viable, for the value of XRP to really be reflected in the amount of business that's being done. So you have a relatively small amount of transactions of XRP relative to the market cap of XRP. Transactions for that specific use case, that is. I think XRP is a good payments network, but in order for any asset to have value, it has to have a market around it. It has to have economy around it. It has to have like reasons why people need to borrow it, like reasons why people need it, for other things. And that's what we're trying to achieve by bringing XRP into DeFi.
Can you talk about the regulatory landscape and what you think about MiCA as well as the U.S. regulations?
So I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, I guess, look, my fundamental view on the regulatory landscape, and I think people maybe sometimes miss the wood for the trees on this, is that fundamentally, any good technological innovation cannot be held back for any meaningful length of period. Whether you say blockchain is a good technical innovation is, I suppose, a philosophical matter. I personally think it is. I think people having control over their assets, being able to not have to pay banks to hold their money, or whatever it is that they do, essentially being a totally gatekeeped economic system. I think that's a valuable thing. And so that's what a blockchain gives you. It gives you an economic system without gatekeeping. So fundamentally, I think it's basically Luddite for people not to just move forward with regulations. It's here. It's not going away. It's idiotic not to let it flourish. I think I only go on hearsay about what MiCA is doing. I think it has some teething problems, but it's nice to have a regulatory environment that is at least defined. Obviously, where I live in the United Arab Emirates, they have a regulatory environment that is defined because they're like much more forward-thinking than many. They also not the issuer of the world's largest reserve currency, for which you can see you may not necessarily want competition for people holding that currency. So I don't really comment on what the Americans are doing. It's well known. It's well known that they don't, they're being quite slow with regulations, trying to fit, 100-year-old test around, how people are doing things. I hope it doesn't hold back, the use of real-world assets on chain. I think, the issuance of assets, the ability to use those assets, the ability to fractionalize assets that couldn't be fractionalized before, like houses, hard to fractionalize. That's very interesting, and I really do hope there is a framework that emerges that preserves a lot of the value that's been built up in DeFi.
Yeah, when you look, I think it's interesting, and I know that we kind of asked about your origin story and kind of the role within Flare and Flare Labs and everything else, but it's been really interesting to watch the ecosystem over the past couple of years. And I'm curious, just from your stance, what you're most, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of things, but what you are particularly proud of since Flare and Songbird launched.
The data. So fundamentally, the FTSO. Myself and my chief scientific officer really wrote that paper. Large shout out to Chief Scientific Officer Nairi. We basically sat around during COVID, thinking about how to make a really robust oracle, and seeing that go from paper to testnet to Songbird to production, seeing the oracle perform as expected, seeing the game theory play out. It's been that is what I'm most proud of. It's really exciting. It was really exciting to watch people delegate to the oracle and for the oracle to perform in fact, slightly better than we expected it to perform. The convergence on the price, within the oracle is fascinating.
If you could change something in the industry, what would it be?
It's a tough one because you always veer towards things like, this crop of meme coins that comes up and everyone loses their money on. But at the same time, if you were to change that, you would be killing off innovation, right? So it's like you make something better with one hand and take away with the other, and it's sort of how do you square that circle? I think education really of the people, and maybe maybe better. I think a slightly more sensible attitude towards risk for at least people that um, can't afford to bear a loss. That would be my takeaway is if you're worth 100 million, of which some of these crypto traders are, and they want to slam in a couple of million into a meme coin and maybe it goes to 20, 50, 100, whatever it is, that's their choice. They can bear that risk. It's the smaller people that think that they're gonna get some huge payoff and they get screwed. That kind of sucks.
I want to kind of get a little bit into your pinned tweet here because I think it's interesting and it deals in kind of the convergence of a lot of different facets of technology. And I'll read it first, and then I would love if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on it. So, almost all future use cases of the blockchain, inclusive of AI, gaming, identity, RWAs, or real-world assets, etc., will require some amount of external data attested on chain or onto chain. Decentralization. And then you say without it, there is no safety, scalability, and low latency are key. Flare is the blockchain for data. And then obviously the kind of the ethos behind Flare, which is connect everything. Can you maybe talk about that convergence of technology, the need for data as these different things come on chain, or even off-chain aspects of traditional business as everybody kind of goes towards full digitization? I would love your kind of thoughts, your oversight.
So I mean, if you look when blockchain started, they were just kind of dumb things, right? They just process blocks, and transactions were put on the chain, and those transactions came to consensus through the network. Then Chainlink happened, and people could build something that was way more interesting. But we're still stuck with essentially that protocol, like broadly, Chainlink, maybe a few others. Everything we want to do, whether it's gaming, monetization of pretty much any digital asset, real world assets in terms of I need to know the inflation rate, I need to know the interest rate, I need a good attestation of the underlying assets that are backing this asset. I need a price in order to, for some esoteric instrument. I need maybe a volatility surface for an on-chain option. All of those things require data. Let's say I want to go into AI. I want to be able to use AI, an AI model, an agreed upon AI model in an application, such that the output of that agreed upon AI model, when given an input, changes something in the state of the network, and therefore does something with the application. It's all data, and all needs a way to be attested, and needs a way to be attested securely, with the greatest possible economic security.
What's interesting
and then that
about
data needs to flow to other networks so they can use it too.
Sorry, I had some lag on my side. I thought you finished. What's interesting about the data model and collateralization is you can literally have anything from the Web 2 world come into Flare, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've watched people build and then fail with these decentralized social media things, and that's because they just don't get the network effects of the existing social media franchises. But if you want to monetize a social media profile using a blockchain, you need a way to get that data. You need a way for an application to get that data, and for that application not to have to rely on one person to provide that data. Of course, it's going to be relying on the API that's coming from Facebook or whatever it is. Instagram, I guess these days. I'm on neither. But you don't want to rely on the intermediary between let's say, Twitter or X.com's API, and that intermediary being faulty. That's where Flare comes in, being able to attest from X.com using 100 validators, using 1 billion and maybe in the future many multiple billions of stake, in order to do that in a way that is, has the least possible incentive to be malicious.
I'm curious if your thoughts, Hugo, because you kind of touch base on, let's say you want to have a social account, like the SocialFi stuff we're starting to see across a crypto more and more, I would say, especially over like the past maybe year or so. I'm curious if you find it a little bit ironic and maybe a bit hypocritical that like we talk about everything going digital and then we're still like, this is being streamed to Twitter right now and X, which is like just a very, I mean, everything's a very centralized platform. It gets down to like, if you don't know what the product is, we are the products on X. Do you think, and it's really hard for new people coming into the space to try to navigate this space because they have no idea what they're looking at on X. They see somebody with X amount of followers, X amount of likes, and they just assume that person must know what they're talking about. How important then does like meaningful data become in social environments maybe over time? And I know it's a little bit of a sidebar question, but I'm just curious your thoughts on where you see something like SocialFi going on chain maybe.
Well, I mean, I guess, there's projects like Lens that try to do that, in a different way, in a more decentralized way. I'm interested in things short-term, medium-term, and long-term. I don't really see people moving away from X.com in at least the short and the medium term. I suspect they won't in the long term either, to be honest with you. It's a perfectly acceptable experience for 99% of what people want to do on that platform. The reality is that probably it's a very minimal amount of people that really care about whether they're the product, on X.com. And I think sometimes us in our industry have a habit of overblowing the interest that perhaps non-crypto people hold in these kind of things. So I think that's one of the reasons why SocialFi and the networks that have been created around that have largely not been successful, because they've not really been able to get the network effects. And in fact, even Farcaster, which has been fairly successful so far, you've seen that there's been calls within X.com for a lot of the Ethereum community to come back to X.com to keep spreading the message. And that I find the most ironic of all. But I do think there's a happy halfway house whereby you can monetize things on existing networks, on chain. But in order to do that, you need data. But you can, if you sit on the sofa and have a chat with mates, you can probably get as crypto anarchist as you wish about all these things. Unfortunately, we do also have to deal with the reality.
So, what are some projects that you find most interesting that have been built on either Flare or Songbird?
The ones, I mean, that comes top of mind, immediately, the one I'm very happy about is, Hex Trust USDX, which is stablecoin, and Clearpool's partnership around that, which allows that stablecoin to be issued into a vault such that it earns treasury yields, US treasury yields. These are 1 to 3 month, US government bonds. And that means that vault emits a token called CUSDX. And that CUSDX ultimately allows for that asset to be used in DeFi whilst it's earning its treasury yield. And for us building the FAssets, that's incredibly useful, because one of the things about the FAssets is that they are fairly collateral intensive. And that is, if you're choosing between having to put your collateral in one protocol or another, then being able to just get this base treasury yield as the minimum return on your use of collateral, that is fantastic, because it then means everything else on top is kind of gravy, so to speak. So it massively lessens the capital intensity of a protocol like FAssets. Also really interesting for trading and lending, borrowing. Perps protocols, let's say you want to take a levered position in something on a Perps protocol, being able to put an asset that is earning yield whilst it's being used as collateral in a Perps protocol. Very interesting. So that's just one. Kinetic, obviously, who you have coming up next, very worthwhile protocol, very good team. Building the probably the premier lending platform on Flare. I expect big things from them. They also built Scepter, similar, same team, Run Blockchain Labs, built Scepter, which is our liquid staking token. That means that you can essentially stake, get a liquid token out. Again, you can use that in DeFi, use it as collateral. Nice things there. Raindex, very interesting. Love their approach to dexes. Far more, I mean, yes, I think people will use, AMM type dexes, in perpetuity, but I really like the Raindex approach. It's almost like an order book based approach on chain. I think there's Enosis are doing really well. They struggled at the beginning when they were called Flare Finance. They had a bad leader, but their leader was deposed and got a new leader who's really good. If you know Nick, Bannock in the community, really like him. Guys stepped up really hard. Been building well. Blaze Swap's nice. Just a really easy protocol. There's a hell of a lot of NFT projects as well, but to be honest with you, there's too many for me to track.
Yeah, I hope you don't get into trouble with that, because anytime that we start being like, "What are your favorite projects?" It's like there's so many to. I'm sure
I'm sure I've missed a few. I mean, of course, we have loads of indexes, but would I call them a project? We have loads of API things. But yeah, it's difficult to be all encompassing. But we're very much focusing on DeFi, because that's where Flare needs to play catch up before it can take a lead.
I'm curious from your stance too, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, the importance of education. I know one guy that sticks out to me directly that I know has been putting in work in the Flare ecosystem forever to educate people and show people was Flare community. So I'll give a shout out to Flare community. That account has been fantastic for a while. Is there any other accounts like that you would recommend following to like learn a little bit more about how to use some of the primitives and protocols, or obviously the main Flare account, things like that, but where else would you maybe think people might want to check out to
just checking my Twitter, because some of these people have complicated names. Like I've noticed a few more people sort of pop up recently. So like there's a guy called like Macro Brooks or David Brooks who like puts out, seems to be fairly fairly conversant in protocols, puts out some good stuff. Obviously you've got a whole bunch of people. What's his name? Let me just go to my Twitter. Give me a second.
Yeah, I'll look up this guy too if I can find him. I'll share here. Oh yeah, this Davis, is this it? Davis Brooks at Macro Brooks.
Yeah, I think like I've noticed his stuff. I mean, I don't know the guy, but he's kind of like really interesting. But I'd say Flare Space is also a very good one. They're one of the validators and oracles. They have really no, I think that's a fake one. Flare.space.
There we go.
That one, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they put out great stuff. There's loads of people, and I forget, and I'm sorry if I missed a whole bunch of people. But
that's on me to just throw out the hey, what accounts are good out there, and then be like, oh, let's shotgun it in real time. No, but I mean, it is like it's critical to have people that are actually out there in the wild, like that are showing or trying their best to educate people about how to use all the technology aspects that are being built. So that's kind of why I wanted to add it in a little bit.
I'll probably shout out Nebuchadnezzar, Crypto Airy, Moonchaser, Tim Rowley, of course.
Yeah, Ari's great. She's been at it forever, and Moonchaser and Ty is great as well. I know Santiago too, so another project building and
Oh
Flare with
yeah, of course,
XDeFi.
XDeFi.
Santiago's awesome
Yeah,
to
yeah,
talk to.
Santiago kills it. Although he hasn't been doing too many exposés on how to use Flare protocol recently, because I think he's heads down building. But yeah, Santiago's great, and his content on Real Vision is very good.
And then I guess I'll kind of ask as we round out here, if you could provide any, any other achievements or milestones that we might have missed within Flare, and maybe just walk us through some closing thoughts, the future of Flare, the industry as a whole. I know that's wrapping a lot into one question, but I would love your insight.
I think milestones, for me this year, the team has been amazing in upgrading the FTSO. That was a much needed upgrade, and I think being able to handle up to 1,000 series up with each item in those series updatable every block is amazing, and that's the team's done really well. But I'd also like to give a shout out to the one of the people that on the team that sort of really put in the legwork to conceptualize it. Ryan Reich, who's one of our engineers. Really appreciate the work he did on that. And then, the FTC is moving forward. So the Flare Data Connector, that's an upgrade from the State Connector, which so the State Connector is on Songbird, but it'll be upgraded to something called the FTC, which is moving forward. I'm looking forward to things like where we can relay our data to other chains so that Flare can act as an oracle for other blockchains. That'll be one of the most exciting aspects for me. Of course, the team behind FAssets, has done a very good job. It's very high touch, high lift protocol, meaning that it's a lot of code. There's a lot of moving parts. And then, getting a UI together for that has been good, and the beta test is going well, and onboarding for the beta test is going well. So a lot of milestones. But for me, the next major milestones are attracting assets to Flare from other networks, not just non-smart contract networks via the FAssets, but smart contract networks like Ethereum, like Solana, like Polkadot, interoperability between those two, but fundamentally bringing assets from other chains onto Flare to participate in essentially the DeFi ecosystem to build liquidity. That's kind of those are the key things I'm focused on.
I forgot to ask this, and I'm going to ask you real quick before we let you go, because bringing assets onto Flare, obviously developers and builders are assets. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about grant, I know that you guys do have grant aspects and what that looks like to bring builders into the ecosystem, things like that. As we kind of close out here, that would be fantastic. I've actually, by the way, I should mention on the side here, I hear a lot of stuff from a lot of people, and I know that we look at grant stuff across the board here, and there's a lot of different entities and a lot of different ecosystems that have just kind of done grants in certain ways. I've heard really good stuff behind the scenes about how you guys have been handling the grant aspect. So kudos to you guys.
Oh, well, that's good. And then that's a shout out to Gabe and Max on the team who handle grants. Gabe's our chief investment officer and has been ex-TradFi, so he's got a disciplined head on him, which is good. But we have a bespoke grants program, meaning you approach us and put a case forward, fill in a grants application, and the foundation will give you a grant or not. Fundamentally, we're focused on cross-chain DeFi at the moment, but if you do have something wild that could be huge, we're still interested in hearing about it. So we've been giving grants to things like DEXs, lending protocols, perps protocols, those kind of things, because that's what Flare needs today. As Flare develops, the grants process will change. There'll be other types of grant available for other types of application. But fundamentally, that's what we're focused on today. So if you didn't get a grant for your project because it's not in that area, I apologize, but we must be very disciplined and we must be very focused on what is happening on the network. It's not to say that stretch use cases that use data from Web 2 are not interesting to us. They absolutely are. But we want to make sure that they have a valid reason to exist before giving them a grant. So we have grants available, usually up to about $500,000, but usually much less. And we'll also be launching an incentive program. We'll be launching an FIP to launch an incentive program. An FIP is a Flare improvement proposal to launch an incentive program to bring assets from other chains to Flare. So ultimately, to give liquidity to Flare.
So that's outside of even just Bitcoin and XRP over time. There'll be an improvement proposal to obviously bring more liquidity, bring more different, ecosystem type assets on the Flare as well. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, stables is probably the biggest area we're interested. Because stables drive the FAssets. The core one of the core collaterals, the two collaterals for FAssets are stables and native. Songbird on Songbird network and Flare on Flare network. So having a deep liquidity ecosystem on Flare around stables, very important.
Well, I've got to say, Hugo, it's been a pleasure. I know it's been I think it's a couple years, but I'm hoping that we don't wait this long to do our next interview with you. And always an honor to be able to talk to such great builders.
Why don't we do the next one when the FAssets launched on Songbird?
Yeah, let's do it. 100%. We are all game. And then Darren, as always, it's awesome to have you helping out with these. And I'm going to give a shout out to Jake from Kinetic for helping with a couple of the questions here before he comes on for an interview, because he'll be mad at me if I don't. But Hugo, whenever FAssets go live on Songbird, we have a date. Come on, we'll do another space and an interview, and that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Hugo.
Really nice to meet you. Nice to meet you both.
Thank you.
Hang out with us here for a couple seconds, guys. And again, that was Hugo Philion, the co-founder of Flare, CEO of Flare Labs. We talked about multitude of different things. Obviously, the huge value proposition of the Flare network is from the data standpoint, decentralized on and off chain data is going to need to be leveraged across all sorts of different industry verticals as this technology converges. We'll give it a second here as Jake from Kinetic hops in, and he's already here because he is on time always. You got a cool shout out from Hugo during that, Jake, which was pretty awesome. And I gave you kudos to helping with a couple of those questions behind the scenes. So thank you. How you doing today?
I'm good. Can you hear me? Is everything good?
Yeah, you sound good. I'm going to try to shotgun another tweet here as we get into the weeds here. But as we start, as we always like to, I think we've done a couple of these before with you, but we'd love if you can maybe just give an intro of yourself and a little bit of an overview about what you do within Kinetic and Flare. That'd be cool.
So I am Jake. That's my name. It's not short for Jacob, believe it or not. I think my parents wanted to just cut to the chase there. We're going to end up shorting it. So, that's probably the most important thing you'll learn from anything I talk about today. I work for Kinetic. I'm the kind of the communications guy, run the social media. I make the media stuff. I voice the tutorials that we have put out, and we'll continue to make more as time goes on because people love a good video tutorial. Yeah, so kind of anything that comes out that people read or consume regarding Kinetic, that's me. A lot of the messaging stuff is me. I think my official title is core contributor. You might be thinking, what does that mean? I'm not sure. But I am a core contributor at the very core. So Kinetic is a lending protocol that is launching on the Flare network. What's really cool about being the first lending protocol to launch on the Flare network specifically is we're kind of a crystallization, right, of a lot of the cool stuff that the Flare network's trying to do. So we are going to be big with FAssets, obviously, as we're offering markets for FAssets when they launch. We're going to be big for Layer Cake, right, when we integrate that bridge solution. It's we're kind of the showpiece, right? We really show off the great stuff that the Flare network's capable of. I know people hate the waiting. I'm right there with you, but we will be launching soon. What does soon mean? I don't know. Obviously, I can't give you specific dates, which people love that. They love that. But Yeah, Kinetic's lending protocol coming to the Flare network. It's really exciting. I'm very happy to join the Flare community. I've been doing my little podcast talking to builders on Flare, and it's been super rewarding. I'm really glad that I did it because I'm fairly new to the Flare network myself, and it was just a fast way to really get clued in on the community, really get clued in on kind of the big people working on this network, and introduce some of the new people coming to the community. So that's been really rewarding for me.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, Hugo kind of mentioned this as well when we were just interviewing him, but so on top of Kinetic, obviously, there's been, it's not like this is kind of the first rodeo. There's been other kind of DeFi or lending protocols built out in other ecosystems as well. Do you, from your experience and just working with everybody at Kinetic and within Rome and everything else, what's the importance of having done it before to make sure that, they're obviously Flare's a unique network, but there's at least a little bit of a benchmark in the past for what's being built here with you guys?
So it's a great thing to bring up, right? People, how do I phrase this? Lending protocols are serious, right? Lending protocols are serious. It's easy to, if you don't know what you're doing, a lot of people just will fork an existing lending protocol and they're like, okay, that one worked. I forked it. I brought it here. We're good, right? That's not the case. You need, audits are not enough. You need constant real-time security. You need people monitoring the network. You need to see if someone's exploiting something. Very often there are people who exploit, kind of nascent, new, or inexperienced teams running lending markets because, maybe they have a different stablecoin standard that's, not exactly fully stable, we'll say, and you can cause people to get liquidated, and that's what you don't want, right? You want, if someone gets liquidated with your platform, which obviously no one wants to get liquidated, you want them to know exactly why, and you want them to be able to trust why that happened, or else the entire thing falls apart, right? So having constant security, being able to show your work, being able to show why things happen, being able to anticipate moves if people are trying to mess with stuff. We have a bug bounty program, we have audits, and we use LedgerWorks for our real-time monitoring. Very, very, very important. It's expensive, right? Which a lot of people can't pay for if they just fork a lending protocol. They can't pay for that real-time monitoring because it is quite costly. But if you don't do it, you're really just opening up a massive amount of risk for people, and it's not going to pay off. And probably a lot of people watching this who are experienced in DeFi ecosystems have seen that happen, right? And we don't want that to happen. That's why we pay the big bucks for that extra protection.
It's funny because most projects that I see that are like EVM do exactly what you're saying, just duplicate all over the place. And the whole thing is trust, right? Like the second trust goes away, the whole project goes away. So I appreciate having real-time threat protection or whatever it's called, but it's a nice feature.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're selling, right? At the end of the day, is trust. And Web3, that is the creme de la creme. That's the commodity that people are looking for. It's another reason that I do my little podcast things, because being able to see a face, being able to see a person is really important. Especially with everybody throwing out like AI tutorial videos and teasers and trying to get you hyped. It's like what gets me hyped about a project is just seeing a guy talking. Because if I don't see that, I'm just like, oh, are you real? I have no idea.
Look, this project has a human.
Yeah.
Really,
I think that's going to be more and more as time goes on, and people lean a little bit too much on AI. I think that value is going to be demonstrated more and more.
Yeah, I mean, I would love if you could maybe talk about the current state of Kinetic as well. I think you're going to be sharing screen a little bit and giving us a little bit of a walkthrough here, which is pretty cool. I think one of the things that we see in this space too is that a lot of people interacting with what's being built are other people that are building things. And then sometimes we just want people to just show us how this stuff works. This is why I think we want to leverage these X lives and stuff like that too, because sometimes it's a bandwidth problem of just not having the time to go out and figure out and do everything on your
100%.
own. You just want to see how everything works from the user experience standpoint. So where are you guys at right now as far as the platform? Is it kind of a little bit of a waiting game? And then after we get through that, feel free to share screen, and I would love to see how Kinetic works.
So we had our week-long testnet event. It was very successful, had a few issues, which, you want those, you want to fix them. Nothing big with the protocol itself, just like, some UI issues and some stuff that needed to, show up on mobile view versus desktop view. It was very successful. It's ended. I made a comprehensive tutorial video going over that and also going over kind of the basic features of Kinetic. So I will be demonstrating it, but if you feel like I just didn't get enough info, check out that tutorial bit. It's like 11 minutes long. And I find those are really, really useful because if you have new people, right, you can throw an article at their face. Are they going to read it? We have limited time. We have limited attention. I have ADHD myself. It's intimidating to get sent a big block of text. So I find that, slow, calm, comprehensive tutorial videos that have, the closed captioning as well. You can follow along, play it at half speed, take your time. If it's something new, right, you're going to want to make sure that you understand what you're doing. Because it can be intimidating. It can be crazy. There's a lot that experienced people in Web3 take for granted. This is an insane space. It's crazy town. And as far as like communication and education, we're so far behind Web 2. That's something that Web 3 really we're behind, right? We're on the bleeding edge in so many areas, but when it comes to education, communication, and clear instructions, sometimes it's tough because we take it for granted. Oh, it seems second nature to us because we've been in this madhouse for so long. But a lot of people are regular humans that don't understand this stuff. So you have to be clear with them.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point. When we started doing all this Genfinity stuff back in 2022, it's like, we're going to put together, and Darren remembers this, I'm sure, we're going to put together this report that is like, let's span across the industry and do some deep dives into DeFi or TradFi and all this stuff. And we came to find out pretty quickly that if we were just doing written content, nobody likes to just read. I mean, it's great as a value add. Like if you add it into what you already have and you're showing people visually, and then you add in kind of the written stuff, I think it adds value, but it's really difficult to kind of bootstrap it. And I think even if you look across this industry as a whole, I think that there's a reason that you don't see metrics with people that are, putting just articles out there and things like that, because at the end of the day, it's like, what is the pool of value from this stuff? And I think there's a lot of stuff hidden behind the scenes. But I did share a screen with this video. It's June 3rd tweet that you guys have, 11 minutes. So for those that aren't able to watch this today with us, feel free to go and check out that video. I'm sure, did you make that video, Jake?
I did make that video. You will hear my voice. I was previously I was accused of being AI. I am not AI. I just have a clear voice when I do voiceover work.
Well, let me stop sharing my screen. You should be able to share your screen, I think, and we'll add your screen up here.
Share screen.
That was actually really cool being able to interview Hugo as well. I mean, it's been a few years and just never had the opportunity yet.
Yeah,
so
he's a nice guy, right?
Yeah, he's nice. He's super nice. I mean, Darren, was that your first time interviewing Hugo?
Yeah, it was my first time meeting him. He's a really nice guy.
I'll give a shout out.
What did he say about me? What did he say? It was good looking? Or...
Yeah.
He was like, that Jake guy from Kinetic really is moving mountains over there.
I knew it.
Yeah, we use those questions. I mean, the FAssets question, and obviously Layer Cake, and some of the FTSO stuff as well. So helped a little bit with some of the due diligence work. You and I talk about this, Jake, sometimes, where it's like everybody in this space is like so content, like, oh, that's a great that's a great, video or whatever. When's the next one coming out? But nobody sees all the work that goes on behind the scenes, like putting together an interview. You, every time you're interview, well, and especially for you, like you're interviewing all these people in the Flare ecosystem. I'm sure you've got to you're prepping, before these interviews with questions, and then you're allocating 45 minutes before the interview starts and a half hour after it ends. It's like an hour interview is actually 3 or 4 hours.
Right. Because you don't want to look like a goober.
No,
Yeah,
goobers aren't a good look in this space. But
I don't want to look like a goober. I do look like a goober, but I strive to not be one.
Let me get your screen up here. I'm going to give a shout out to Crypto Airy and Dirk from Expector too, because I think both those guys reached out to Hugo to try to get him into an interview here. All right, we're going to go full screen here. Hopefully everybody can see it, and I'm going to give the floor to you, Jake.
I mean, look at this. This is the Kinetic dashboard. It's gorgeous. I will say, disclaimer, this is still the test net. Kinetic's not on mainnet yet. So, if you see random values and you're like, that number doesn't make sense, it's because these are testnet values. It's a safe, risk-free environment for you to do whatever. You don't have to worry about monetary value. It's for testing. So, don't be like, what? This 22% didn't match when it eventually launched. They're liars. So, when you come onto this page, this is the first page you'll be greeted with when you go to kinetic.market when our protocol launches. Right now it's our lander. Click connect wallet. You agree to these terms and conditions. Do we read them? You can. Do I ever? No. You won't be able to see my MetaMask connections, but I am connecting. I made a fresh wallet just for this. Connecting it, approved it. I am connected. So where do I go from here? Well, assuming that you have Flare, or specifically S-Flare, the liquid staking version of Flare. Now, the reason we integrated, we are not Scepter, the people behind S-Flare or liquid staking. We do work with them. The people, Rome Blockchain Labs, who does Kinetic's infrastructure, are behind Scepter. So we integrated them because people want to claim their Flare drops, and they want to, get delegation rewards from using their Flare. So they, wrap it. Well, you're not going to want to supply your wrapped Flare to a lending protocol if, you're going to lose your Flare drops to whoever is borrowing your wrapped Flare. Nobody wants that. So that's why liquid staking is good, because you can keep your delegation rewards, you can keep your Flare drops, and you can still use your Flare in stuff like Kinetic. So starting off, you'll want to add some tokens to your wallet, just so you can use and see all the various tokens. Once again, you can't see my MetaMask, but I've just added them. Then I keep going to the other screen. And then you go to the token faucet, you request some tokens. So we would send you some testnet tokens. Shout out to the people who went through this when we had our testnet open. We might open it again, maybe just for fun. But honestly, the feedback we received was fairly minimal, and it was very good. So we've worked to fix a lot of this stuff already. So what's a lending protocol? Starting at the basic. So you can supply different assets. For these are test assets. This is not going to be representative of all the assets we have on launch. We're going to start with USDX and S-Flare as our first assets, and we're going to be adding more as we go. So we want to supply some S-Flare. And I think, how much did it send me? It's not going to send me S-Flare, right? But it's going to send me regular Flare. So if I wanted to supply 50 S-Flare, it's going to be like, hey, you don't have any of that. So I can try to supply my Flare, and it'll say, hey, you should stake Flare on Scepter. So we've directly integrated liquid staking into our protocol. It's very easy. You just say, yeah, I want this. I want to use this Flare. So I'm going to go ahead and stake it so I can use it. Obviously, if you've already staked through Scepter, it'll just show up in Kinetic. you can't see this, but my MetaMask is asking me to confirm. I confirm. Wait for that beautiful block to process that transaction. So exciting. You know, really the waiting is it's the best part. It builds
Waiting
the
is
anticipation.
Tom Petty said that waiting is the hardest part.
No, he's wrong.
Oh, okay.
He's wrong. It's actually so much fun. Especially the crypto community loves waiting. They love it. Okay, so you can see, bing, bang, boom, I've got my S-Flare available. Obviously, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio because the idea is you supply your flare, your rewards and flare drops are increasing the price of S-Flare, so it's worth a little bit more than flare, but by the time you take it out, you get your rewards. That's the basic thing. So let's supply all of it. Now, why would you want to supply? Maybe you're not interested in borrowing. You can just supply and earn an APY, earn a yield on that asset that you're supplying. It's if you're using a lending protocol, it's more useful to then borrow against it to use it for different financial opportunities or strategies that we're not giving financial advice, that you decide. A lot of people loop it in, right? They borrow off their supply and then add more supply for that extra yield. Once again, these values are not representative, but let's go through them. So you got your supply API. So this is your annualized projected return of supplying liquidity. Now, usually this is going to be lower than some other stuff, but once again, these values are not representative. Distribution APY, this ties into our token Jewel in our key staking program, which I'll touch on towards the end. But you will also be getting a return. These numbers are not representative of what it will be in our token for supplying to Kinetic as well. And we'll have other incentives rolling out. We'll have flare incentives. There will, especially at the beginning of the launching of a lending protocol on the Flare network, we will have, incentives aplenty to incentivize people. So collateral factor is an important thing. So this is the maximum amount of your supply, what you've supplied, that can be borrowed from the Kinetic protocol with this asset used as collateral. So when you are supplying something and you intend to borrow with it, you're going to want to use it as collateral. So you'd confirm that. Your wallet would pop up. Confirm that. You wait for that beautiful block. Waiting is the greatest part. Collateral has been enabled. So we're going to approve it. We're going to supply it. Ooh, I'm going to get some of that beautiful APY. Once again, collateral factor, that percentage is the maximum amount of your supply that you can borrow against. We're an over-collateralized structure. So you're not going to be able to borrow more than you have, which is a good thing. It makes things, a little less crazy and risky, for people who want to make massive returns, but it also heavily reduces the chances that you will lose all your money, right? We don't want that to happen. We don't want you to, be in weird debt. We don't want you to somehow lose the full amount of your supplied asset or owe us, or, that's not something that we want to do. It's a little less crazy, a little less, as some people say, sexy. But we're interested in being a base, primitive resource for other projects to build upon, right? And they will be building upon us. We're that base resource. So now we've supplied our asset. We're loving it. You can see it has already populated on the dashboard. My assets. Look at this. We got that S-Flare. We got that APY number that's not representative. You can see, oh, look, there's the key symbol. There's the jewel symbol. There's a flare symbol. Look at all the APY we'll be getting. So many incentives in made up land. So let's borrow against it. What do we want to borrow? I mean, we can pick whatever. A lot of people do stablecoins, right? Because it's easy to feed that into something else. That's going to stay stable at a certain value. People do, right? People do borrow other assets like ETH, or, we're going to eventually hopefully have, the FAssets like Bitcoin, Doge. XRP, etc. But those assets change value. And if you're making financial strategies, it's something else you're going to have to take into account so you don't get liquidated. So here you can, use this bar to choose what percentage of your previously supplied asset you want to borrow against. And you can see up here your health factor after borrowing. This little indication right here is telling you, is this a good idea? So, as your health factor reaches a value of 1, you'll see a little warning pops up here. At 1 is when you get liquidated, right? So you want a nice comfy range. You don't want to be close to 1. You get that red X. Everybody knows red X's are evil. X is the most evil letter in the alphabet. That's a fact. That's a fact. If we're in a middle range, that pop-up saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, goes away. You get a nice triangle warning symbol. Everybody knows triangles, one of the most evil shapes. Pyramids, anyone? I mean, come on. So you want to stay away from that triangle as well. You want to get into the green, the most holy of colors. So you can see your health factor after borrowing, 2.27. That's a good range. Got the green check mark. Down here in rates, you can see the borrow APY. Now, wait, I'm going to be making money from borrowing? How does that make sense? Well, when lending protocols start out, we want people to use this, right? We want people to try it out. We want people to try out borrowing. So we will incentivize that because a lot of people are, well, let's say skittish. They're easily scared by this whole process. They hear the term liquidation. They think, there's no way I can figure this out. I'm just going to get liquidated and lose all my money. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. So we want to incentivize it so that people can test it out. There's not a huge risk, and they can make a little bit of, what do I say? Further asset expansion while doing it. So yes, there will definitely be borrow APY incentives. As people become more familiar, those will, taper off, as is normal, once people know what the deal is. So
Darren, you had a situation. I mean, there's a lot of different situations, and without getting into the weeds too much, but I mean, people run into situations all the time in this space where, they end up offloading digital assets to pay for real life circumstances. And I mean, and I'm not saying Kinetic directly, obviously not financial advice, all that stuff, but if there was a seamless lending platform or borrowing platform that you could have used, would you have used something like that instead of liquidating some of the assets that you held?
Yeah, absolutely. I got sick a while back ago and I just sold everything. But if I would have borrowed against it, I could have avoided paying taxes for everything that I sold, right? Because if I could borrow against it, it's not a taxable event. So it's these are super interesting. I know a lot of people use these for speculative leverage pretty much, but there is real world use cases to these, and family emergencies are certainly fits in that category. And the risk thing is really nice because it just tells you where you should be with the loan and everything, and where you're going to get liquidated. It makes it very simple. So the S flare, that's staked flare. So if I stake it to the FTSO, that I'm still earning that interest while I have the token, and now I'm earning another token on top of that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So essentially the way that liquid staking works, right, is you hand over your flare to Scepter, right, and they manage it because there's delegation and there's also staking, which is separate on the Flare network. So they handle it in a way that will generate the most amount of passive yield from those services. You would yourself try to kind of decide. I think there's a limit for people that even do staking on Flare. So most people will do delegation if they have a low amount, if they can't meet that limit. So you basically, Scepter will manage it in a large block, right? Which makes the whole thing a lot more efficient because you're not a bunch of different individual people. But you still get your representative amount of flare back. And they are using those incentives, right, to increase the value of S flare so that when you personally, it keeps track of what flare drops you would get and what delegation rewards you would normally get. When you swap it back, you'll get your flare that you put in plus your rewards. So everybody cares about the flare drops. They don't want to lose the flare drops. This was the only way we could have people use their flare in DeFi, because you're not going to use non-wrapped flare because you're incentivized to have wrapped flare. And so you're not going to use naked flare, and you're not going to use wrapped flare because then you're supplying and lending out your flare drops and your rewards. Nobody wants to do that. So it was something we had to do. It was going to be a big issue if we didn't do this. There is a fee for unstaking, and there's an unstaking period you have to do. So, if you think that personally managing your stuff, you'll be able to get more rewards, more power to you. I'm not here to push liquid staking on you. But if you do want to use Kinetic, you have to use the liquid staking, because you would just be losing money. You would just be losing flare.
Is SFlare out right now? And is there like whole marketplaces of arbitrage going on just over like that small amount of FTSO rewards?
Yes, they're Scepter launched a few weeks ago. Beat us to the punch. We have a rivalry with them, really. They launched. People are loving it. A lot of people are using it. There's the little arbitrage opportunities that people are taking advantage of. So we can't wait for us to get out there so we can really build them up and work together. Because once again, we are a showpiece. We're a showpiece for a lot of technology coming to the Flare network. People are going to be building off of us. People don't really understand, obviously DEXs are your first primitive, but next is lending protocols, and it really enables a lot of future DeFi development, perps, futures, vaults are a big thing that go hand in hand with lending protocols. There's lots of extra products that are built on us. So, we want to make sure things are simple, things are safe. So let's go ahead and borrow. Let's do, around 30% of what we've supplied. MetaMask comes up. I'm confirming the transaction. Boom, it's confirmed. And we have borrowed. Beautiful. You can check out the transaction. So it's like, okay, I've borrowed. I can see this immediately. Don't have to refresh. Don't have to do anything. In my dashboard, here's my supplied stuff. Here's my borrowed stuff. I'm not going to give you guys financial advice, but from here, right, you would use this for something. You are going to be rewarded just for borrowing it all. There's not a time you have to pay back any of these loans. You just have to make sure that your health factor, which you can see here, and this little tooltip will tell you more. You want to make sure that it's at a good level. And here's a little more information on your health factor, your borrow limit, 3%. You don't want it to be a large amount. You can probably do a little bit more than that, but you want it to stay in the green. It'll turn yellow and red once things get into a worrying level. But you're going to want to use this for something, right? Some people use this to buy another asset, loop it back in, do the whole thing again, and increase their amount of APR by, borrowing so they can increase their holdings and then, pay back that loan. You can use it for other stuff. You can use it for speculative stuff. There's a lot of different things. I would encourage people to, think about interesting things they could take advantage of if there's a new token launch coming. There's lots of different ways that you can use this to your advantage. Be a little smarter with your money. And if you think that you're, once again, not financial advice, but if you think that there's an opportunity coming, it's a way to give you a little bit more to work with, right? And the risk is not, as long as you're considering your health factor, your collateral factor, the risk is not as big as you might think. So for the people out there, let's just go and repay our loans, see what the process is like. You click repay. Let's repay all. You don't have to repay all every time, but we're just going to go ahead and click max for us. You approve that allocation of tokens in your MetaMask, which we will do. Waiting for that transaction to be confirmed. Allowance has been set. Click repay once we've done the allowance. And this is just a confirmation in your MetaMask that you are repaying that loan. And once again, our favorite part, waiting. It has been repaid. So it's a very simple process. You can see the dashboard once again has immediately updated. Does not have old information. Our loan's been repaid. Everything's fine. We still have our supplied assets. We're still earning APY just for supplying. It's collateralized. Everything's good. You know, it's pretty simple. What I will touch on just in a basic level, we didn't really focus on this for the testnet because it's a more involved process. But we have an interesting way of earning more APY with our key stake program. So if, you know, eventually the Jewel token, which is the Kinetic's token, will launch, you know, if people have that, they're interested in purchasing it, not financial advice. If they do end up having that token, what you can do with it is we have basically voting motions where we don't want people to just, and this is also a regulation thing, right? This is the legal thing. We don't want people to just, you know, buy our random token, stake it, and then do nothing. So we have a system where, you know, you stake your Jewel for key, you lock up your Jewel in the staking program, and you have to vote on different motions. So it keeps you active, right? It keeps you involved in the future of the protocol. The motions are going to be relevant to how you as the community want the protocol to function. Now, if you don't want to vote, if you are like, I'm not going to be, you know, around, because you're incentivized to vote early and often in the range of time that you have. They're 45-day sections. You can delegate your vote to us, and we will vote for you. But at least your account is still, you know, choosing to vote one way or another. You'll still get the rewards. If you completely don't want to engage with the voting thing at all, that's the best option. There is a small fee in doing that. I would encourage everyone to be active, obviously, to vote, to read the motions, to learn about them, to see how they want the protocol to function, because we aren't going to just be throwing up things like, well, you know, do you like blue or green better? Do you think cats or dogs are better? You know, our motions are going to tie directly into our governance structure and how we want to improve and change the protocol for, you know, the Flare community. Because, you know, a lot of lending protocols have been built. The infrastructure that Kinetic is built on has been used for lots of 5 or 6 other lending protocols before us. But this is made for the Flare network. The other ones didn't have this. The other ones didn't focus on governance in this way. The Flare network is incredibly unique, and we want to make sure that we showcase that, and we want to make sure that we are able to react to changes and poll our community, essentially, the people who are invested in us, who are invested in our token, invested in our platform. We want to make sure that their voice is directly, clearly, and easily heard so we can be better for them, we can be better for Flare, and you know, we can just be much more successful in general.
It's funny, like a lot of people have like a negative connotation over leverage or yield or anything like that, and there's groups that take it to the other extreme. But when you read a lot of those like financial books, they pretty much tell you to use leverage in your favor when it's appropriate. Just use it at the right risk setting, and it seems like you have everything like at a point where it's green checks when you're in the right risk setting and red checks when you're in the wrong risk setting. So it's it could be really helpful for people.
Well, I mean, this might be a little off topic, but one of the great things about Web3 is, you know, it's the future of money, right? It's the future of being able to control and manage value. And, you know, not to get political, but a lot of people benefit from other people not knowing how to effectively manage and understand and maneuver value, right? There's lots of massive billionaires that what they do is just move money around in different places. And I I and friends have gone through the process of trying to get loans for businesses or startups or whatever. And there is a lot they don't tell you. There's a lot that they don't make clear. They throw a big contract at you and say, well, I hope you read it. But they're not over collateralized, right? A lot of times the money that they're getting from your supply, right, is being used for a lot of different things and can fail. There's never going to be a point where we are using your supply. We don't hold it, right? It's non-custodial. We're not like there, because there's been lots of problems with custodial lending platforms in Web3 and outside of Web3. We don't hold it. It's in a smart contract. We can't do things with it. We're not putting all this supply somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too into the weeds, but if you look at what goes on centralized exchanges, what do you think that the centralized exchanges are doing with users' funds? You don't custody them. You're technically, those we've seen very much so that those assets don't even necessarily exist on those exchanges. It's just the funds and what's going on
paper
behind
records
and what's going on with your funds behind the scenes. Why not take advantage of custodianship of your own assets and doing maybe some of the things that these people are trying to do with your funds behind the scenes? And yeah, so I won't go too into the weeds with that, but yeah, Jake, it's been awesome having the opportunity to have you sit down and walk us through Kinetic again. And Genfinity, obviously, we have a media partnership with you guys, so not financial advice to anybody out there. But yeah, I mean, today was pretty much a Flare takeover, Darren. We had Hugo for the first 40 or 45 minutes. Always a pleasure to have Jake on here as well. And is there anything that we missed, or maybe if there's not, can you walk us out with anything you might be excited about? Maybe some inklings of when you guys expect some of these aspects to start going live. That'd be cool.
So we're fairly ready. What we're trying to do at this point is make sure that the ecosystem is ready, right? We're super early. Flare's super early. There's a lot of things that we don't have that we need. And because we are this kind of crystallization of what Flare wants to offer with DeFi, there's lots of partners we're working with. So what we're doing at this time is just trying to get all our ducks in a row with everybody, so we're ready to really just like blow it out with our launch, and make sure that there's a wealth of information, a wealth of resources, and a wealth of things to do when we come out, because we're going to be interacting with a lot of different people. We're in the ecosystem. I think it's called what's it called? A keystone species, right? I think the gopher tortoise is one of them, where it'll make burrows for other animals, and a lot of other animals in the ecosystem rely on this one species. And we're kind of like that. We're kind of like a gopher tortoise if I really wanted to sell us, kind of like a slow, big, fat turtle. But we do help a lot of people out. We do touch a lot of things. We got our little fingers in a lot of different pies, and we're just trying to make sure that Flare's ready for us to show up.
Yeah, I mean, I would love maybe just expand just a tiny bit. I mean, you look at different projects trying to build and all the funding aspects and things like that, and I mean, I even know to try to start a Web3 company in the United States. I mean, how long does it take? Anybody that's done it, how long has it taken to try to get a bank account? You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know. When you get into a lot of the different aspects that, not just, let's say, retail would be using a platform like Kinetic for, but actual builders and projects that are trying to build and manage their own funding and things like that. Like, obviously you have to deal with a lot of aspects of security. If you're having portions of a company treasury, like, operating in some sort of a borrowing or lending protocol. But what are some of the unique ways that you would see maybe some projects leveraging something like Kinetic? What if, like, I can think right off the bat, like if you have a published roadmap and you're doing a tech sprint to release some sort of update to your platform and you need to onboard another dev or 2 devs or 3 devs or whatever it is, that's one aspect of something that I could think you could use something for borrowing for. But I mean, I'm sure you have way more ideas that maybe you can't share here, but yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, one thing is like we want institutions to use Kinetic, and something behind the scenes is like there's a lot of money invested in Flare and the Flare token and the Flare ecosystem. There's a lot of investors who have a bunch of Flare. They're not sure really what to do with it, but that they know that this ecosystem is growing. They know that this ecosystem is set for big things, and we want them to interact with Kinetic. We want them to supply. We want them to provide liquidity, because that's kind of the big piece that ties into oh, well, why haven't you launched yet? Like we use the testnet. Seems great. I mean, we're pretty good. It's just we need to make sure that liquidity is at a level that all of this can work, right? What assets you're going to support. We will support the assets that have adequate liquidity because we want it to be safe. We don't want it to be thin. We want people to know what's going to happen, right? And it's not just us. We need to work with a lot of other partners. Luckily, we have the stablecoin that's launched on Flare. Was very important. That was something that we didn't have before. We're coordinating with them. We're coordinating with Clearpool. We're coordinating with like pretty much everybody who's dealing with any kind of liquidity to make sure that we're ready. And we're at such an early stage. There are going to be lots of opportunities to leverage borrowing and supplying, Flare for other assets to make lots of different, take advantage of lots of different financial opportunities that are coming because we're kind of at the base level as far as DeFi on Flare is concerned. So, the opportunities are endless for what you can do when, we know that things are going to kind of grow. We know things are kind of going to grow from here. It would be one thing if we expected everything to just like slowly die off, right? But we're really at a base level here. We are early, which is nice to still be early in 2024 to something. So there's going to be a lot that dev teams can do. We're working with a lot of different partners to make sure that not only is this basic functionality available for them to make decisions on their own, but products can be built on this, which our good friend Santiago is working just on that, and we're working with them as well.
Awesome.
What I find interesting is like what you were saying earlier about the banks is like they had to approve that with over collateralized loans. There's no approval process. It doesn't matter what color you are, what idea you have, what anything is. You just get the loan if you have 150%. So I'm interested to see what kind of opportunities grow from that.
Yeah, I mean to me that's kind of the cornerstone of what I find interesting about Web3 is making money simple, making money transparent, and lowering that barrier, lowering the middlemen. I hate middlemen. The most exciting thing about cryptocurrencies and Web3 is just like getting the middleman out. You don't need it, right? You don't need someone to, what kind of car do you drive? I don't know, man. There's none of that. It's just if you have this amount of asset, we're not holding your thing. You hold your thing. It's collateralized. You're not going to like lose that and more. There's not going to be this whole cascading, collapsing process that we see over and over and over again with these custodial services. It's simple and clear, and I hope that it gives people a lot more power over their finances than they had previously.
Yep. I think the democratization of things that you can do with the assets that you hold is without the need for intermediaries and people that are taking off all sorts of portions of cuts all along the way. Is going to be really interesting. I think we had Jorgensen on from Constellation like a couple weeks ago, and he was like, most people don't even realize how many things occur before you before you buy a house, let alone before you sell a house. There's 10 different cuts being taken behind the scenes. You might only see 2 of them, but Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to watch, Jake. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for walking us through all things Kinetic. Want to give a huge shout out to Hugo, obviously co-founder of Flare Network, CEO of Flare Labs as well. Equal shout out to Darren for helping us with all these spaces as always. And for you guys down there, or for you guys across all these platforms we're streaming it to, please let us know if you guys like this content and what you'd like to see next, who you'd like us to interview next, and we'll go from there. Jake, thank you so much for your time today, dude. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Awesome as always.
Nice